Developing mental toughness is you have to teach your athletes to become aware of what happens when they're performing well and what happens when they're struggling. And some of that means you as a coach need to be aware. You need to understand the difference mentally between good performance and bad performance. So I'd like to start with something that may sound far out, but it's sort of very basic. And it's critical for you to understand to be effective with your kids. And it's sort of like a, Cliff Notes version of how the brain works. Okay, up here you see a horrific rendition anatomically of the human brain. It's broken into three parts: front brain, midbrain, hindbrain. Okay, person's looking to the left. Each part of the brain controls different functioning in your life on and off the field. Your front brain controls thinking. So if you have a kid in the on-deck circle or up at the plate who's thinking about, I haven't hit in 7 games, and they're thinking about technique and mechanics, they're in their front brain. If you have a catcher behind the plate who's thinking about, the technique back to the pitcher, and what if I bounce it in front of her? What if I throw it over her head? They're in their front brain because our front brain controls thinking. Your midbrain controls emotions. Hindbrain controls something that I call knowing. Now that's not IQ, that's not intellectual knowledge. That's the knowing that comes from doing. It's the knowing that comes from experience. For example, you know how to walk. I watched all of you walk in here. You did an amazing job. Your hindbrain controls walking. Your hindbrain controls talking. Driving a car, riding a bicycle. Anything that you've done a lot of over and over again gets controlled by your hindbrain. To understand the difference between when your athletes excel and when they struggle, and you really need to get this piece, what I'd like to do is now talk about how your front brain and your hindbrain work. I'm going to leave the midbrain out of our discussion. Okay, so front brain processing. Again, this sounds far out. It's down to earth, trust me. When you're in your front brain, the processing goes on consciously. And all I mean by that is when you're in your front brain, you know it because you can hear yourself thinking. Sentences after sentences. Front brain processing, the language are words, and the words are put together in sentences. This is how the processing goes on. Front brain processing is what's called analytical. And what I mean by that is when you're in your front brain breaks things into pieces. It would be like a kid's up at the plate in a game, and you're focusing on every small aspect of their technique, what they're doing with their hands, what they're doing with their elbows, what they're doing with their weight, the timing, all of that stuff. So our front brain breaks things into pieces. Front brain processing is judgmental. So it's our front brain that offers friendly words of advice and kind of evaluation, like that sucked, what's wrong with you, I can't believe you're doing that, this is terrible. And because your front brain works this way, processing information consciously, using words and sentences, breaking things into pieces, front brain processing is glacially slow, incredibly slow. Okay, because again, it can only process as fast as you can think, one sentence after another. I can guarantee you, if you have a kid who's struggling in a game, who's struggling up at the plate, this is a kid who is overthinking. This is a kid who's in their front brain. Now, heavy-duty implications for you guys as coaches, because what a kid thinks has a lot to do with you and what you're kind of sharing with them, and if you're giving them too much information. But we'll get there in a minute. Let's talk about how your hindbrain works. Hindbrain processing goes on unconsciously. In other words, when we're in our hindbrain, we have no clue. Okay, when you walk down the street, you're talking with a friend after coming out of the movie theater, your hindbrain, while you're doing that, is controlling the width of your step, the distance of your step, how high you're lifting your knees. Your hindbrain makes sure you don't walk into somebody else, trip on a crack. When you get to the edge of the sidewalk, your hindbrain makes sure you step down the right amount in a smooth, coordinated way. And the entire time that's going on, you're unconscious. The language of your hindbrain images and muscle memory. Okay, pictures and feel. Unlike your front brain, what your hindbrain does is it takes all of the pieces and it coordinates them. So the job of our hindbrain is to coordinate the whole. Let me back up a little. A good metaphor for your front brain, when I said it's analytical, is think of a 100-piece puzzle. In analytical, you're only focusing on one small piece. You do not see the picture. Your hindbrain, however, takes all of the pieces and fits them together in a coordinated whole. So your eyes are now drawn to the picture, not the pieces. Hindbrain processing is non-judgmental. Okay, so you do it, you don't do it, there's no evaluation. And because your hindbrain processes information this way, unconsciously, using images and muscle memory, coordinating the whole, hindbrain processing is very complex. It can kind of process very complex stuff like this in a split second. Here's an example of hindbrain processing. What's your name? Jim? Okay, so I throw the ball to Jim, and Jim goes like that and catches it. Reflex, okay, muscle, hand-eye coordination, total reflex. If Jim's, that's the hindbrain. If Jim's front brain were in charge of that, Jim's front brain would do something like this. Holy shit, he's throwing me the ball. Should I use my left hand or my right hand? What if I drop it? What if I drop it? I'm going to look like a complete idiot. Okay, I got to lay my wrist back. I got to spread my fingers. I got to time it just right. And your front brain goes through this litany of instructions and worries, and your hindbrain just catches the ball. So based on what I'm saying, when you have your kids go into a game, what part of the brain you want running the show? The hindbrain. Now, obviously, if you're working with kids who don't know, they're beginners, they're learning technique, then you have to go through your front brain. Then you have to be conscious. But when you go into a game and you're working on, you're working on the performance, you don't want kids thinking. Now, I used to get referrals from a particular Division I team, and I'd get catchers, and I'd get hitters, and I'd get coaches. Not coaches, catchers, hitters, pitchers. And they would all be struggling performance-wise every season. And one of the reasons was during the competitive season, the coach was micromanaging everything that these hitters and pitchers and catchers were doing and getting them to think. Okay? And actually changing technique during the season. The worst time, I mean, you've heard the one of the Yogi Berra quotes that actually makes sense. A full mind is an empty bat. You guys have heard that before? Which means if you get up to the plate and you got a lot of thoughts going on, whether you're thinking about your average or you're thinking about mechanics, you're thinking about technique, you're going to come up empty. And it's very important that you have an understanding of this, because technically you can actually be right in what you're telling these kids, but you're flat out wrong because of the timing of it. Okay? You want to work on trying to help these kids get into their hindbrain. Now, how do you do that? The main way you do that is by helping control their focus of concentration. Okay, like concentration is absolutely key to peak performance, and when you see kids who are struggling, you can see that their concentration is off. They're making all these concentration mistakes. If you're aware, for example, that your kids are in the wrong place concentration-wise, you're in a position to help change that. Okay? If you're not aware that your kids are making concentration mistakes, then you're not going to be able to help them get out of it.